Welcome to episode 252 of the Pharmacist Voice podcast. I am your host, Kim Newlove. This is my fall 2023 update. If you can believe it, Thanksgiving is next week already. This year is just flying by. I hope you are having a fabulous fall. Get ready for an update on my personal life, my business, my podcast, and what I've been listening to, reading, watching, and playing. These seasonal updates give you an opportunity to get to know me better as a person. I'm just Kim, so I'm going to let you in on some of the personal stuff. But first, I know this may be the first time you have ever listened to my podcast. This is not my typical type of an episode, by the way. I typically only do a seasonal update 4 times a year, fall, winter, spring, and summer. So, if you are new to the Pharmacist Voice podcast, welcome. I am glad you're here. Again, my name is Kim Newlove. I'm the host. I am a pharmacist by training. I graduated from the University of Toledo College of Pharmacy with my BS Pharm in 2001. I have experience as a pharmacist in hospital, retail, compounding, and behavioral health. But I am not in clinical practice anymore. I am a voice actor and a podcast host. When I say voice actor, think medical content. Among other things, I narrate audiobooks for pharmacists, and I do medical narration for pharma, biotech, and CME companies, that's continuing medical education companies, among others. I also teach one self-paced online course about drug name pronunciations, and I also teach another one for pharmacy professionals about podcasting. If you have a project in mind, whether it's an audiobook, a medical narration project, or something podcast related, because I love podcasting, contact me through my website, thepharmacistvoice.com. And if you want to learn more about drug names or planning a podcast, visit my online course platform, which is kimnewlove.com. Now, a little bit of background about why I became a voice actor and a podcast host. I was inspired by my nonverbal son who has autism to combine my background as a pharmacist with my speaking voice and launch my business, The Pharmacist Voice, in 2017. My son Craig helped me realize the power of having a voice and using it. What do I typically talk about on this podcast? I have solo shows and I have interview shows. I have several types of solo shows, in fact. The drug name pronunciation episodes are my favorite episodes, my personal favorite, and they're also my most popular solo shows as well. For example, the episode about semaglutide has, I think, something like 4,000 total listens across all podcast platforms and my YouTube channel combined. Aside from the pronunciation series, though, I also have seasonal updates like today's episode, and the other solo shows are straight up about being a pharmacist and being a voice actor, being a pharmacist podcaster, or my career transition from pharmacist to voice actor and podcast host. My interview shows are much more straightforward. They feature a variety of people, usually pharmacists, who use their voices to advocate for something like public health, educate in some way, like having an online course or self paced online course, or entertain, like being a podcaster or a YouTuber, so that you are inspired to use your voice too. My son helped me realize the power of having a voice and using it. I hope to inspire you to realize the power of having your voice, and I want you to use it too. My listeners are typically pharmacists, pharmacy students, pharmacy technicians, pharmacy professors, pharmacy owners, pharmacist podcasters, and medical narrators. But everyone's welcome to listen. If you found this podcast, thank you for tuning in today. I'm glad you're here. You can find the show notes for this episode on my website, thepharmacistvoice.com. Click on the podcast tab and then find episode 252. Now, let's dig into this update. Family first. In this part of my seasonal update, I mentioned something about each member of my family. That would be my husband, Nathan, and our adult sons, Craig and Derek, and then, of course, myself. Nathan first. If you're new to the show, you may not know that I've been with my husband since I was a teenager. I was 14, he was 17 when we met, so we've been together for 30 years and married for 22 of that. He's a mechanical engineer and he's been back at First Solar for 9 months now. He's been working for them on and off for the past 16 years. During that time, they have only had two open houses, like two family day events. That means I have been inside my husband's workplace twice. That's not much. One of those times, however, was last month in October of 2023. They had a family day, and my husband and our son Derek and I really enjoyed it. Our older son Craig stayed at home with grandma and grandpa. First Solar makes solar panels, in case you don't know that. Over the years, they have added new facilities. So they used to have just the first building, then they built a second one. My husband works in the third one. They're building a fourth one pretty soon as well. So the third production facility is what I saw last month. The first time I was invited to go to a family day event, I got to see the first building. Since it's a completely different building, I had a completely different experience. Congratulations on your growth, by the way, First Solar. It was an awesome facility. I got to see solar panels be made. Really cool. And one last thing about Nathan has nothing to do with work, and I guess it's kind of about our whole family, but our family pictures from July turned out great. My husband, of course, is in them, and I included one in today's episode artwork. I'm very proud of my husband. I love him. He's bald and bearded, which I love. I don't know why, but I love. So, anyways, check out that episode artwork. All right. I gotta quit blushing. I love my husband. All right. As for our sons, Craig and Derek, I will be brief, or at least I will try. Craig is 20. He has autism. He's what's called a super senior, and he goes to our local public high school. Craig's focusing on getting ready for what's called transition to adult services. He's not ready for the workforce. So I would love to say that we're getting him ready for the workforce, but we tried that in the summer. It didn't quite work. We're going to keep working towards that. But in the meantime, he's a happy go lucky guy who loves school. He loves the outdoors. He loves reading books with adults and riding in cars and so much more. He would make a great delivery person someday with the right job coach. Maybe someday we'll make that happen. Like I said, right now, Craig's 20 and in high school. For my international listeners, people usually graduate from high school around the age of 18 in the United States. So it is a little unusual for a child to be in school at the age of 20. However, in Ohio, students with developmental disabilities like Craig, who qualify for services, can stay in school until they're 22 years old, if that's right for them. So, our plan is to take it a year at a time, of course, but he's probably going to stay in school until he's 22. Part of figuring out what comes next, as I call it, has been touring adult day services. So it's called Adult Day Services or ADS. I wouldn't exactly call it adult daycare, but I guess I would compare it to that as a point of reference. When Craig's not at school, I am his full time caregiver. There is a nationwide shortage of caregivers. And that's one of the reasons I had to leave clinical practice. I didn't have enough support, or Craig didn't have enough support, you could say. Craig can't get the support he needs now, so I continue to be his person. And if I can't find an adult day program for Craig after high school, my time as a voice actor and maybe a podcast host too will probably end. I know that's kind of a negative note to end on, so let me end on a positive note here. I'll tell you that my husband and I took Craig to a lot of fun fall themed attractions in the past couple of months. We went to an apple orchard, a pumpkin farm, Cedar Point's Hollow Weekends, and we intended to do some other stuff, but we got COVID. Anyways, for anybody that's new to this podcast that hasn't heard me talk about this, Cedar Point is an amusement park in Sandusky, Ohio. It's like 90 minutes from us. It is an amazing amusement park. And during what's called Hollow Weekends, the park is decorated for Halloween and they run the rides. So you get the decorations and the rides. We had a fun day together. We only went once, but we definitely do it every year. It's part of our fall of fun. Unfortunately, because of COVID, we missed visiting our favorite corn maze right at the end of October, but we'll hit it next year. There's always next year. It just doesn't feel like we've had our complete fall of fun until we've visited an apple orchard, a pumpkin farm, a corn maze, had at least one hayride, done the Hollow Weekends thing, and carved pumpkins. There's always these things that we do. We didn't carve pumpkins either because when you have COVID and you think about sticking your hand in a cold pumpkin, it gives you the chills. It gave me the chills. I didn't carve a pumpkin this year. Anyways, I hope you enjoyed your fun fall traditions as well. We love fall here. All right, now on to Derek. Derek is our 18-year-old son who is typically developing, so he does not have autism, and he is attending the University of Cincinnati in Cincinnati, Ohio. He's majoring in engineering. I've heard him talk about civil and architectural engineering, but I don't think that he has decided on a major yet. He just started a job at the rec center on campus refereeing games. That's not a word you say every day, refereeing. He's refereeing games like soccer and basketball. Now, for the last 5 summers, he's been a baseball umpire, and this referee gig is right up his alley. So he seems to love it, and we're proud of him for navigating this major change that is college and also having the ambition to get a job. I think that's great. He's finding his people, he's learning in his classes, he's growing and he's working towards achieving his full potential just as a little human. I guess he's a big human. He's 6 foot tall. Anyways, it's an exciting time to be Derek. We miss him. We are proud of him. If you're listening, Derek, we love you. And we look forward to seeing Derek next week for Thanksgiving break. I can't believe it's Thanksgiving next week, but it is. All right. I guess it's my turn. My turn to talk about what's going on in my personal life. Here's a brief update. I just got over my first ever case of COVID. I mentioned that a little bit ago. I tested positive October 27th, and I've had my negative tests. So since November 9th, I'm fine. But I was sick for about 2 weeks. And I don't know if you've ever had COVID or an illness that lasted 2 weeks, but I feel like I am very behind on everything right now. But the good news is I am catching up. I am catching up. One of my strengths is being able to make a list and tackle it. I'm a very hyper rational person. I like to take inventory of everything that's going on and just tackle it. Now, I also apply the 4Ds to my list when I tackle it, but I have been tackling my list with enthusiasm. What are the 4Ds, you may be thinking? They are delete, delay, delegate, and diminish. Put them in any order you want. Those are the 4Ds. I talked about them in episode 208 of this podcast. So, episode 208 of the Pharmacist Voice podcast. When I make a list, I intend to do all the tasks on the list and do a good job. Sometimes, however, I have to delete things off the list. This is a very healthy thing to do. I'm just going into this because maybe you could learn something from it. For example, I was invited to speak to a group of Girl Scouts in person about podcasting on November 4th. I was COVID positive and I had symptoms. I was not going to expose the Girl Scouts to COVID. It is, what is today? November 15th as I record this. I missed that event entirely. Therefore, I deleted it from my to do list. That just makes sense. The only thing I have to do now is ask the person organizing the event how it went because I missed it and I care about following up. And I hope it went well and I hope they invite me back next year. For the past 2 months, I had planned to speak to the girls. I was really looking forward to it. I was a Girl Scout back in the 80s and the 90s, if you can imagine that. And talking to those girls would have felt like I was giving back to a program that gave quite a bit to me. Hopefully, there will be a next time. I also had to delete from my list going to the Ohio Pharmacists Association mid-year meeting. That was supposed to be November 5th. That carried on. Of course, I didn't go. I had COVID, definitely still COVID positive with symptoms, and I had to stay home. No way I'm going to infect a bunch of pharmacists who have work to do. Anyways, not going was a bummer, of course. I was really looking forward to going, and I had mentioned that I was going on a previous podcast episode. COVID ruins plans, but at least I'm over it. As for the other 3 Ds, delay, delegate, and diminish, I'm still working my way through the list and either doing the task or applying one of those Ds to the tasks. For example, I want to try a yoga class with my friend Joe. He has his own studio, and I'm just going to have to further delay going to the yoga studio. Delay is one of the 4 Ds. It is totally acceptable to delay starting something new like that. I just don't have enough time right now to start something new. As for delegating, I have some stuff around the house that needs to be done by Thanksgiving. I am hosting and I have to delegate some of that stuff to my husband. I need some picture frames hung and I need a toilet seat replaced. My husband can do that just as well as I can. And if he can't get it done, I have a handy woman named Hannah. She's awesome. And she'd be happy to take my husband's money and get those jobs done for me. Sometimes you gotta delegate. And then there are some tasks that will be diminished. That means doing things quick and dirty. For example, I really want to get into the weeds about how I'm getting paid for my other job as an independent caregiver for the Ohio Department of Developmental Disabilities. They don't give pay stubs like a traditional employer. That was very surprising to me. But I do care about getting paid correctly, and I really want to compare what I'm submitting to them to the amount that I'm getting paid. But I don't have time to micromanage that part of my life. Each week when I get paid, it's in the ballpark from, the previous week, so I leave it alone. I get paid for mileage for driving my individual that I care for around, so it's close enough. I call that diminishing the task. I just do it quick and dirty. I just make sure the pay's in the ballpark. That's good enough for now. I hope at some point I will have more time to get into the weeds on that because I am curious. All that might have been TMI, too much information, but you get the picture. I'm behind, I have a list, I'm excited about getting through it, and I'm either doing the things on the list or I'm applying the 4 Ds to the things on the list. Also, in my personal life, I have been a member of a Toastmasters club for about 4 years now here in Northwest Ohio. I try to attend meetings twice a month. So I'm looking forward to getting back to that now that I've, gotten over COVID. In other news, I went out to lunch with some of my retired pharmacist friends last month. My first boss at Walgreens, Harold, organizes lunches maybe every other month or so, and I enjoy seeing my former coworkers and catching up. All right, last thing about my update. I donated blood on Saturday, November 11th in honor of Veterans Day, and I just want to put a plug in for the American Red Cross. They are always looking for donors. If you are able to donate, please donate before you get busy with the holidays here in the United States. I don't know about you, but November 23rd through January 2nd will be a blur for me. The holidays are always busy. Next, I'll talk about my business, the Pharmacist Voice LLC. I've been teaching my podcast planning students and earning money from that online course. That has been fun. I also taught a one time in person podcast planning class at the 577 Foundation, which is right here in Northwest Ohio. Teaching in person is now my favorite way to educate future podcasters. It is awesome. I should probably sign up for some conferences. Students have very specific questions and they are not afraid to ask them. That is cool. And in other news, I am taking a group medical narration class and working on updating my medical narration demo for my website. It has been 3.5 years now since I updated my demo. That's it for my business. Moving on to the Pharmacist Voice podcast. The podcast is rocking. For a small niche podcast, the Pharmacist Voice podcast is doing very well. I have tens of thousands of downloads on the podcast platforms, several more thousand on YouTube, and in the last 90 days, 55 countries have tuned in. If you have been listening, thank you. Thank you for listening. The country with the most downloads is the United States, followed by Canada, Thailand, and India. Again, thank you for listening. Just last month, I changed the recipe, so to speak, for this podcast. I still have a mix of solo shows and interview shows. The pronunciation series will continue. The seasonal updates, like this one, will continue. But I also started a new interview series, which I'll plan to run until I stop podcasting, as far as I'm concerned. It is called the Pharmacist Podcasters series. In the Pharmacist Podcasters series, I interview pharmacist podcasters about their podcasts in order to help you feel inspired to start one too. It is fun for me to learn about other podcasts from other podcasters. It's really interesting, their stories and why they started their podcast, who their audience is, what they want their audience to do with the information, what's in it for the audience, all the things. And at a minimum, I want you to feel inspired to use your voice for whatever you feel passionate about, even if you don't want to become a pharmacist podcaster too. I love this series. I'm sure you can tell by how I'm talking about it. And to complement this series, I will also be publishing some interviews with podcasting professionals. These are podcasting professionals that I want my students to know. It's great content for them, of course, my students, but if you are interested in starting a podcast too, you'll definitely want to tune in to that series. My other podcast is going well too. In case you don't know this, I started a second podcast. It is called the Perrysburg Podcast. You can find that at perrysburgpodcast.com. There's a link to it in the show notes. The Perrysburg Podcast is an informational podcast for prospective, new, and current Perrysburg, Ohio residents. If you don't know this, I live in Perrysburg, Ohio. It's right outside Toledo, Ohio. I usually just tell people that I live in Toledo. Geographically, it's just easier to find. Anyways, this other podcast is the podcast that I needed when I was considering a move from Toledo to Perrysburg in 2006. It's also the podcast that I needed when I actually moved here in 2007. And now that I've been here for 16 years and I'm always wondering what's in this town and why people like to live here, I can explore that in the podcast. Therefore, on the Perrysburg podcast, we talk about what's in Perrysburg and why people like to live here. Feel free to check that podcast out. The website again is perrysburgpodcast.com. Last week, we talked about the American Legion post in town for Veterans Day, and this week, I'm highlighting the Chamber of Commerce. I'm learning a lot, I'm taking more of an interest in my own town, and I'm enjoying this second podcast. I even bought a new microphone for this new podcast so that I can do in person interviews more easily. I really like that mic, it has been fun. All right, that wraps up my podcast update. Now, on to my favorite part of this episode, which is an update on what I've been listening to, reading, watching, and playing. Let's go. What have I been listening to? I made a great Halloween music playlist in October. So I was listening to Ghostbusters, Superstition, Thriller, and all the like. Now that it's November, I'm on to other music. I do have an eclectic taste in music. That's right, I have an eclectic taste in music. Lots of different stuff. Old rock and roll, classic rock, country, so much. I'll share what's on my favorite playlist another time. Next Friday, I will be tuning into Christmas music. As far as podcasts go, I've been listening to The School of Podcasting, of course, NPR's Up First. Plus, I have been catching up on episodes of the Disrupt podcast. Dr. Justin Cole from Cedarville University featured me in his September 25th episode. Thank you, Justin. I'll put a link to those three podcasts in the show notes on thepharmacistvoice.com. I love audiobooks and I continue to listen to the Bible on audiobook. At this point, I am in the book of Romans. That's in the New Testament. I only have 10 hours left out of 75 total. It is a very long audiobook, very long. My adult Sunday school class at church has been trying to read the entire Bible from cover to cover this year. We're not going to get it all done by December 31st, but we will be close to finishing and we'll just continue until we're done. The other book that I'm listening to, the other audiobook is The Naked Roommate and 107 Other Issues You Might Run Into in College. Very different from the Bible, let me tell you. Anyways, I'm reading that one in honor of my son Derek, who's in college. I, as a parent, am curious about what college students today face. It has been a good read or a good listen, you might say, and I only have 90 minutes to go. What's next? Probably The Ballad of Songbirds and Snakes by Suzanne Collins. Of course, that'll be on audiobook. It is the prequel to the Hunger Games trilogy. The movie's coming out in the theater soon, and I want to see it. Gotta read the book, then watch the movie. It's one of my favorite things to do in life. What have I been reading? Physical books. What have I been reading? Mostly books with Craig. We read just about all of the Halloween and fall themed children's books in our whole entire house in October. Even though he's 20, he loves to read children's books. I read to him. That's what I call him reading. I read to him. We also finished The Secret Garden by Frances Hodgson Burnett. That was in October as well. Then we watched the Hallmark movie version of The Secret Garden, which I loved. The Hallmark version of The Secret Garden is my favorite movie of all time. Favorite movie. The book was great too, I must say, and that was my first time ever reading it. It's funny how it was my favorite movie, yet I had never read the book. Anyways, got them both done now. Now we're reading a book called Solar Flare: The History of First Solar. That is where my husband works, and I'm not trying to brown nose them. They gave my husband a copy of that book, Solar Flare, one year, and now I'm reading it with my son Craig. It was on the shelf, looked interesting. Now we're reading it. It's very interesting to hear about photovoltaic solar panels because I know nothing about them. There have been a ton of ups and downs in the solar industry too. I had no idea. We're almost done with the book. I think it was only 140 pages long. It's huge, like a yearbook from a high school student. Ginormous book, very heavy, well made. And I'm not sure what's next for me and Craig. We are going to have to pick something out. I always like suggestions. Feel free to message me. What have I been watching? My husband and I always watch a show together, and right now we're on the ninth and final season of Scrubs. Thank God it's almost over because I'm not liking the ninth season. The eighth season was awesome. I thought that was the end of the whole entire series, and then there's this ninth season, which we're working our way through. Once that's over, we'll be on to something new, and it is Nathan's pick. I picked Scrubs. We've been wanting to watch Survivor and The Amazing Race, but we're waiting until our son Derek comes home for winter break. Once those finals are over and he's home for break, we'll start watching both as a family. Probably one then the other, not at the same time. Anyways, we have also been watching Halloween movies with Craig all last month. We saw the original Ghostbusters from 1984, which I probably saw for the first time when I was in elementary school. And we also saw Ghostbusters Afterlife. That was a good one. But we've also been watching other stuff, mostly for Craig's benefit, like Coraline, Elemental, that's a Pixar movie, and of course, The Secret Garden. I've also been watching The Bible Project with my adult Sunday school class. It's animated. It's like a animated comic book version of the Bible. It helps us to understand our readings and it is entertaining. It is on YouTube, so if you want to check it out for free. There is a link to it in the show notes on thepharmacistvoice.com. Also on YouTube, I've been watching Minding Your Minutes with Dr. Brigitte Surfity. She had me on her YouTube podcast in October. Thank you, Brigitte. I really enjoyed that. Also on YouTube, I've been watching some of my favorite channels like Mama Dr. Jones, a board certified OBGYN who talks about women's health. That's one of my favorite. I also watch The Holderness Family, Saturday Night Live reruns, and something new, The Girl with the Dogs. This YouTube channel features a dog groomer who transforms dogs of all kinds, from scruffy to fluffy. That's kind of my intro. I don't know if that's how she describes herself. She's great, and I love her channel. As far as what I've been playing, I have not been playing much of anything, board games or online. I used to love playing Ticket to Ride, but the developer is changing platforms. This has been one of the greatest disappointments of my fall. So I can no longer play online versus people. I don't know really anything about the new online platform. It's something called Steam. 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 More on my woes with Ticket to Ride next time with my winter 2024 update. All right, last thing I've been playing has been fantasy football. I don't know if you know this, I am in a fantasy football league. It is a church league. So my husband leads it, my son Derek's in it, I'm in it, and some of our church members. I won over my son Derek last week, 147 to 115. Go sneaky squirrels. Let's go. That's my team, the sneaky squirrels. I think that does it for this last part about what I've been listening to, reading, watching, and playing. I need to wrap up this episode and get busy catching up from being sick. I've got my list, I've got the 4Ds. Let's go. Thank you for joining me for episode 252 of the Pharmacist's Voice podcast. Please visit thepharmacistvoice.com to read the show notes. In the show notes, you'll find links to First Solar, the American Red Cross, donate today, episode 208 of this podcast about the 4Ds, my social media links, and links to the podcasts, books, movies, and YouTube channels that I mentioned today. Next Friday, which is November 24th, Black Friday, it is my interview with Dr. Deeb Eid. He is the host of R Exposed YouTube podcast. That's R Exposed. You can find that at youtube.com/@ RXPOSED. R Exposed. I'm looking forward to sharing our interview with you. It's part of my Pharmacist Podcasters series. Thanks for listening to my fall update today. Have a wonderful Thanksgiving holiday. I will talk to you next week.